welcome back. Let's read some more. I could not drive American Truck Simulator today because my computer was crashing. So let's read about the Everglades National Park in Florida. That's down here, the south part. Miami and Tampa. This whole area you can go if you have the Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. You could take a flight from Miami across the Everglades to like Tampa, Orlando or something else. But I don't have that. So it could be interesting to visit Florida in the future, but I don't have the money. So I think large part of Miami was swampland or wetland in the old days. So they did drain the wetland and expand Miami City. But I have the Miami there, we'll read later. But not today. Maybe next, but let's read this show. Read loud, activate, back, show, read loud, end of documents.
Everglades. Coordinates 26.0 degree N 80.7 degree W. This is a good article. Click here for more information. Everglades wetland. The most prominent feature of the Everglades are the sawgrass prairies found across the region. The most prominent feature of the Everglades are the sawgrass prairies found across the region. Location of Everglades in the southern third of the Florida Peninsula. Location of Everglades in the southern third of the Florida Peninsula. Coordinates 26.0 degree N 80.7 degree. Location Florida, United States. Area total 7,800 square miles, 20,000 square kilometers. 1. Highest elevation 25 feet, 7.6 m. 1. The Everglades is a natural region of flooded grasslands in the southern portion of the U.S. state of Florida, comprising the southern half of a large drainage basin within the near-tropical realm. The system begins near Orlando with the Kissimmee River, which discharges into the vast but shallow Lake Okeechobee. Water leaving the lake in the wet season forms a slow-moving river 60 miles, 97 kilometers, wide and over 100 miles, 160 kilometers, long, flowing southward across a limestone shelf to Florida Bay at the southern end of the state. The Everglades experiences a wide range of weather patterns, from frequent flooding in the wet season to drought in the dry season. Throughout the 20th century, the Everglades suffered significant loss of habitat and environmental degradation. Human habitation in the southern portion of the Florida Peninsula dates to 15,000 years ago. Before European colonization, the region was dominated by the native Calusa and Tequesta tribes. With Spanish colonization, both tribes declined gradually during the following 2 centuries. The Seminole, formed from mostly Creek people who have been warring to the north, assimilated other peoples and created a new culture after being forced from northern Florida into the Everglades during the Seminole Wars of the early 19th century. After adapting to their gen, they were able to resist removal by the United States Army. Migrants to the region who wanted to develop plantations first proposed draining the Everglades in 1848, but no work of this type was attempted until 1882. Canals were constructed throughout the first half of the 20th century, and spurred the South Florida economy, prompting land development. In 1947, Congress formed the Central and Southern Florida Flood Control Project, which built 1,400 miles, 2,300 kilometers, of canals, levees, and water control devices. The Miami metropolitan area grew substantially at this time and Everglades water was diverted to cities. Portions of the Everglades were transformed into farmland, where the primary crop was sugarcane. Approximately 50% of the original Everglades has been developed as agricultural or urban areas. 2. Following this period of rapid development and environmental degradation, the ecosystem began to receive notable attention from conservation groups in the 1970s. Internationally, UNESCO and the Ramsar Convention designated the Everglades a wetland area of global importance. The construction of a large airport 6 miles, 10 kilometers, north of Everglades National Park was blocked when an environmental study found that it would severely damage the South Florida ecosystem. With heightened awareness and appreciation of the region, restoration began in the 1980s with the removal of a canal that had straightened the Kissimmee River. However, development and sustainability concerns remained pertinent in the region. The deterioration of the Everglades, including poor water quality in Lake Okeechobee, was linked to the diminishing quality of life in South Florida's urban areas. In 2000, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan was approved by Congress to combat these problems, which at that time was considered the most expensive and comprehensive environmental restoration attempt in history. However, implementation faced political complications. Names. This map made by the U.S. military shows the term Everglades was in use by 1857. The first written record of the Everglades was on Spanish maps made by cartographers who had not seen the land. They named the unknown area between the Gulf and Atlantic coasts of Florida Laguna del Espiritu Santo, Lake of the Holy Spirit. 3. The area was featured on maps for decades without having been explored. Writer James Grant Forbes stated in 1811, "The Indians represent the southern points as impenetrable, and the British surveyors, wreckers, and coasters had not the means of exploring beyond the borders of the sea coast and the mouths of rivers." 4. British surveyor John Gerard de Bram, who mapped the coast of Florida in 1773, called the area Everglades. The name Everglades first appeared on a map in 1823, although it was also spelled as Everglades as late as 1851. 5. The Seminole call it Pahokee, meaning grassy water. 6. The region was labeled Pahokee on a U.S. military map from 1839. Old Halford had earlier been called Everglades throughout the Second Seminole War. 4. A 2007 survey by geographers R. E. J. Lamb and Raymond K. Oldakowski found that the Glades has emerged as a distinct vernacular region of Florida. It comprises the interior areas and southernmost Gulf Coast of South Florida, largely corresponding to the Everglades itself. It is one of the most sparsely populated areas of the state. 7. Geology. The geology of South Florida, together with a warm, wet, subtropical forward/tropical climate, provides conditions well suited for a large marshland ecosystem. Layers of porous and permeable limestone create water-bearing rock and soil that affect the climate, weather, and hydrology of South Florida. 8. The properties of the rock underneath the Everglades can be explained by the geologic history of the state. The crust underneath Florida was at one point part of the African region of the supercontinent Gondwana. About 300 million years ago, North America merged with Africa, connecting Florida with North America. Volcanic activity centered on the eastern side of Florida covered the prevalent sedimentary rock with igneous rock. Continental rifting began to separate North America from Gondwana about 180 million years ago. 9. When Florida was part of Africa, it was initially above water, but during the cooler Jurassic period, The Florida platform became a shallow marine environment in which sedimentary rocks were deposited. Through the Cretaceous period, most of Florida remained a tropical seafloor of varying depths. 10. The peninsula has been covered by seawater at least 7 times since the bedrock formed. 11. Limestone and aquifers. Fluctuating sea levels compressed numerous layers of calcium carbonate, sand, and shells. The resulting permeable limestone formations that developed between 25 million and 70 million years ago created the Floridan Aquifer, which serves as the main source of fresh water for the northern portion of Florida. However, this aquifer lies beneath thousands of feet of impermeable sedimentary rock from Lake Okeechobee to the southern tip of the peninsula. 12. 5 geologic formations form the surface of the southern portion of Florida: the Tamiami Formation, Caloosahatchee Formation, Anastasia Formation, Miami Limestone, and the Fort Thompson Formation. The Tamiami Formation is a compression of highly permeable light-colored fossiliferous sands and pockets of quartz, 150 feet, 46 m, thick. It is named for the Tamiami Trail that follows the upper bedrock of the Big Cypress Swamp, and underlies the southern portion of the Everglades. Between the Tamiami Formation and Lake Okeechobee is the Caloosahatchee Formation. A satellite image of the Everglades taken in March 2019 limestone formations in South Florida. Source: U.S. Geological Survey named for the river over it. Much less permeable, this formation is hyalocalcitic and is composed of sandy shell marl, clay, and sand. Water underneath Caloosahatchee Formation is typically very mineralized. Both the Tamiami and Caloosahatchee formations developed during the Pliocene epoch. 13, 14. Surrounding the southern part of Lake Okeechobee is the Fort Thompson Formation, made of dense, hard limestone, shells, and sand. Rainwater is less likely to erode the limestone to form solution holes, smaller versions of sinkholes that do not intersect with the water table. In this formation the beds are generally impermeable. 15. Underneath the metropolitan areas of Palm Beach County is the Anastasia Formation, composed of shelly limestone coquina, and sand representing a former mangrove or salt marsh. The Anastasia Formation is much more permeable and filled with pock sand solution holes. 15. The Fort Thompson and Anastasia Formations, and Miami Limestone and X, were formed during the Sangamonian interglacial period. 16. The geologic formations that have the most influence on the Everglades are the Miami Limestone and the Fort Thompson Formation. The Miami Limestone has 2 facies. The Miami Oolite facies, which underlies the Atlantic coastal ridge from southern Palm Beach County to southern Miami-Dade County, is made up of ooids, tiny formations of egg-shaped concentric shells and calcium carbonate, formed around a single grain of sand or shell fragment. The other facies, which underlies the eastern lower Everglades, in Miami-Dade County and part of Monroe County, consists of fossils of bryozoan organisms. 17. The unique structure was some of the first material used in housing in early 20th century South Florida. The composition of this sedimentary formation affects the hydrology, plant life, and wildlife above it. The rock is especially porous and stores water during the dry season in the Everglades, and its chemical composition determines the vegetation prevalent in the region. The Miami Oolite facies also acts to impede flow of water from the Everglades to the ocean between Fort Lauderdale and Coot Bay, near Cape Sable. 18. The metropolitan areas of Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm Beach are located on a rise in elevation along the eastern coast of Florida, called the Eastern Coastal Ridge, that was formed as waves compressed ooids into a single formation. Along the western border of the Big Cypress Swamp is the Immokalee Ridge, or Immokalee Rise, a slight rise of compressed sand that divides the runoff between the Caloosahatchee River and the Big Cypress. 19. This slight rise in elevation on both sides of the Everglades creates a basin, and forces water that overflows Lake Okeechobee to creep toward the southwest. 20. Under both the Miami Limestone Formation and the Fort Thompson Limestone lies the Biscayne Aquifer, a surface aquifer that serves as the Miami metropolitan area's freshwater source. Rainfall and stored water in the Everglades replenish the Biscayne Aquifer directly. 16. With the rise of sea levels that occurred during the Pleistocene approximately 17,000 years ago, the runoff of water from Lake Okeechobee slowed and created the vast marshland that is now known as the Everglades. Slower runoff also created an accumulation of almost 18 feet, 5.5 m, of peat in the area. The presence of such peat deposits, dated to about 5,000 years ago, is evidence that widespread flooding had occurred by then. 21. Hydrology. The consistent Everglades flooding is fed by the extensive Kissimmee, Caloosahatchee, Miami, Myakka, and Peace rivers in central Florida. The Kissimmee River is a broad floodplain that empties directly into Lake Okeechobee, which at 730 square miles, 1,900 square kilometers, with an average depth of 9 feet, 2.7 m, is a vast but shallow lake. 22. Soil deposits in the Everglades Basin indicate that peat is deposited where the land is flooded consistently throughout the pre-development flow direction of water from Lake Okeechobee to Florida Bay source, U.S. Geological Survey year. Calcium deposits are left behind when flooding is shorter. The deposits occur in areas where water rises and falls depending on rainfall, as opposed to being stored in the rock from one year to the next. Calcium deposits are represent where more limestone is exposed. 23. The area from Orlando to the tip of the Florida peninsula was at one point a single drainage unit. When rainfall exceeded the capacity of Lake Okeechobee and the Kissimmee River floodplain, it spilled over and flowed in a southwestern direction to empty into Florida Bay. Prior to urban and agricultural development in Florida, the Everglades began at the southern edge of Lake Okeechobee and flowed for approximately 100 miles, 160 kilometers, emptying into the Gulf of Mexico. The limestone shelf is wide and slightly angled instead of having a narrow, deep channel characteristic of most rivers. The vertical gradient from Lake Okeechobee to Florida Bay is about 2 inches, 5.1 centimeters, per mile, creating an almost 60-mile, 97 kilometers, wide expanse of river that travels about half a mile, 0.8 kilometer, a day. 24. This slow movement of a broad, shallow river is known as sheet flow, and gives the Everglades its nickname, River of Grass. Water leaving Lake Okeechobee may require months or years to reach its final destination, Florida Bay. The sheet flow travels so slowly that water is typically stored from one wet season to the next in the porous limestone substrate. The ebb and flow of water has shaped the land and every ecosystem in South Florida throughout the Everglades' estimated 5,000 years of existence. The motion of water defines plant communities and how animals adapt to their habitats and food sources. 25. Climate. Hurricane Charley in 2004 moving ashore on South Florida's Gulf of Mexico coast. The climate of South Florida is located across the broad transition zone between subtropical and tropical climates, Köppen or and CFA. Like most regions with this climate type, there are two basic seasons: a dry season, winter, which runs from November through April, and a wet season, summer, which runs from May through October. About 70% of the annual rainfall in South Florida occurs in the wet season, often as brief but intense tropical downpours. The dry season sees little rainfall and dew points and humidity are often quite low. The dry season can be severe at times, as wildfires and water restrictions are often in place. The annual range of temperatures in South Florida and the Everglades is rather small, less than 20 degrees Fahrenheit, 11 degrees Celsius, ranging from a monthly mean temperature of around 65 degrees F, 18 degrees Celsius, in January to 83 degrees